Hollywood has always hidden its darkest tragedies behind bright lights, but few stories are as haunting as those of the legends who lost everything to alcohol. These were icons once worshipped by millions, talents who shaped entire eras, faces that defined what cinema could be. Yet behind their fame, a destructive force quietly pulled them into a downward spiral. Many of these stars died young, isolated, bankrupt, or forgotten, their brilliance overshadowed by addiction. In today's story, we revisit 10 Hollywood legends whose lives were shattered by alcohol and uncover the painful truth the industry tried for decades to bury.
Clark Gable. The breaking point came during the filming of The Misfits in 1960, when he stumbled onto set so drunk that he forgot the dialogue he had rehearsed for weeks, forcing the production to halt for hours. That man was Clark Gable, the king of Hollywood, whose charm and authority defined an entire era of American cinema. Known for Gone with the Wind, his commanding screen presence made him one of the most bankable stars in history. But privately, Gable drowned his exhaustion, loneliness, and decades of emotional wounds in alcohol. His marriage to Carole Lombard had been the anchor of his life, and her sudden death in 1942 shattered him beyond repair. From that moment, drinking became his refuge. Gable pushed himself through grueling film schedules, often hiding whiskey in his trailer, ignoring doctors' warnings, even as his health began to fail. Friends noted how the sparkle in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a permanent fatigue. By the end of The Misfits, Gable's heart was barely holding on. He suffered a massive heart attack soon after filming and died in 1960 at 59. A legend whose strength on screen concealed the silent destruction happening within.
Corey Monteith. The world realized the depth of his downfall in 2013 when he was found unconscious in a Vancouver hotel room, surrounded by empty vodka bottles, barely breathing and dangerously close to cardiac arrest. That man was Corey Monteith, the rising Hollywood star whose warmth, charisma, and breakout role in Glee made him a global phenomenon. To millions, he was the charming, wholesome face of a new generation. But behind the fame was a long, painful struggle with addiction that began when he was just a teenager. Monteith had battled alcohol and substance abuse for years before fame found him. Stardom brought pressure he wasn't prepared for. The constant scrutiny, the expectations, the fear of failing publicly. Though he entered rehab multiple times and had the support of co-star Lea Michele, the cycle of relapse haunted him. Producers adjusted shooting schedules to accommodate his recovery, and friends noticed his growing exhaustion. On July 13, 2013, Corey Monteith died, at 31, from a toxic mix of alcohol and drugs, his body unable to withstand the spiral he had fought so long to escape. His death shattered fans worldwide, marking the tragic end of a life that had only just begun to unfold.
Errol Flynn. The turning point came in 1955, when he appeared on live television so intoxicated that he slurred entire monologues, staring blankly into the camera while millions watched in disbelief. That unraveling performer was Errol Flynn, the swashbuckling superstar whose roles in Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood made him one of Hollywood's most enchanting leading men. His athletic grace, beauty, and charm defined the golden age, but off-screen he lived in a whirlwind of excess, scandal, and uncontrollable addiction. Flynn drank from morning to night, often arriving on set unable to stand, forcing directors to rewrite scenes or shoot around his condition. His reputation for wild parties, affairs, and legal trouble became as famous as his films. 3 marriages collapsed under the weight of jealousy, impulsivity, and alcohol-fueled rage. Financial mismanagement brought him close to ruin, and estrangement from his children deepened his loneliness. By the late 1950s, Flynn was physically destroyed. His liver, heart, and lungs were deteriorating, and friends described him as a ghost wearing his own face. In 1959, at just 50, he died in Vancouver, his body showing signs of severe alcohol damage. The world lost a legend whose charm could dazzle millions, yet could not save himself.
John Barrymore. It was a disastrous night in 1949 that exposed the fracture he had tried to hide for years. During the filming of Under My Skin, he arrived so intoxicated that he couldn't say a single line, collapsing in front of terrified crew members. That man was John Barrymore, once hailed as the greatest American actor of his generation. Known for his Shakespearean mastery and magnetic screen presence, Barrymore carried the entire legacy of the Barrymore dynasty on his shoulders. But the wealth, acclaim, and constant spotlight only deepened the addiction that had already consumed his health and reputation. Alcohol turned him unreliable, volatile, and tragically unpredictable. Directors dreaded hiring him, studios considered him a financial risk, and his marriages disintegrated one after another. Estranged from his children and surrounded by enablers, Barrymore spiraled into bankruptcy and humiliation, performing in cheap productions simply to pay for liquor. Friends recalled a man who once commanded any room, now shaking, forgotten, and unable to remember the brilliance he had given to cinema. John Barrymore died in 1942 at 60, his body destroyed by years of drinking. Even in death, he became a cautionary tale, a king of the stage undone by the addiction he could never defeat.
John Belushi. The moment that exposed everything happened in 1977, when he was rushed to the hospital after vomiting blood during a performance that should have marked his triumphant return. That collapsing figure was John Belushi, the explosive comedic force who redefined American humor in Saturday Night Live and became a cultural icon with the Blues Brothers. Belushi's energy, improvisational genius, and magnetic personality made him unstoppable on screen. But privately, the pressure to remain the wild one pushed him toward an increasingly destructive addiction. Though widely known for drug abuse, few realized how deeply alcohol dominated his life. He drank heavily before shows, during rehearsals, and long into the night, with friends recalling his inability to stop once the first drink touched his lips. Fame intensified the cycle, endless parties, enablers, and the constant expectation to perform. His marriage to Judy Jacklin became strained under the weight of his addictions and erratic lifestyle. By the early 1980s, Belushi's body was failing. On March 5, 1982, he was found dead at just 33, the result of a tragic combination of alcohol, drugs, and relentless pressure. His death became a symbol of Hollywood's brutal cost on its brightest talents.
Mickey Rourke's The fall became undeniable in 1983 when he was arrested after wandering drunk through a hotel hallway. unable to remember his own room number or even why he was there. That man was Mickey Rourke's idol and Hollywood's original rebel, the legendary Lee Marvin, a powerful presence whose gravelly voice and rugged charisma shaped films like The Dirty Dozen and Point Blank. Marvin was a war veteran, an Oscar winner, and a symbol of masculine toughness, but behind that exterior lived a restless, tormented soul who relied on alcohol to quiet the chaos within. Long before fame arrived, Marvin drank heavily to cope with trauma from his wartime experiences. Success only magnified the problem. Studio parties, endless bar nights, and a reputation for being the drunk you still couldn't ignore. His marriage to Betty Marvin deteriorated as his binges escalated, and friends grew used to his violent mood swings and bar fights. On set, directors struggled to keep him sober long enough to finish scenes, often filming around his hangovers. By the late 1980s, years of alcoholism had ravaged his immune system and weakened his lungs. Lee Marvin died in 1987 at 63, leaving behind a legacy of brilliance, overshadowed by the addiction that followed him to the grave.
Oliver Reed. The collapse everyone feared arrived in 1989 when he was found on the floor of a New York apartment, surrounded by empty liquor bottles, unable to speak, unable even to recognize the friend who called his name. That broken man was Oliver Reed, one of Britain's fiercest screen presences and later a Hollywood powerhouse, known for Women in Love, The Three Musketeers, and eventually Gladiator. Reed's raw intensity made him unforgettable on screen, but off-screen, alcohol ruled every corner of his life. His drinking was legendary, even by Hollywood standards. Pubs banned him, studios feared him, and interviewers never knew whether they would get brilliance or chaos. Reed drank during filming, between takes, and on nights he had promised to stay sober. His marriage suffered under the weight of his unpredictable rages and long disappearances, and friends who tried to intervene often found themselves pushed away. By the 1990s, the industry hesitated to hire him despite his talent, worried he would not survive a production. During a break in filming Gladiator in 1999, he challenged several sailors to a drinking contest and collapsed shortly afterward, dying of a heart attack at 61. His final performance was magnificent, but his final years were marked by a battle he never won.
Paul Newman's. The unraveling became impossible to hide in 1958, when he showed up on the set of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, shaking so violently from withdrawal that the crew feared he would collapse before filming even began. That broken figure was Paul Newman's closest friend and rival, the legendary Montgomery Clift, once hailed as the most gifted actor of Hollywood's golden era. Clift redefined acting with his vulnerability, his quiet intensity, and a beauty that made him an icon long before the word existed. But behind that fragile brilliance was a man battling demons no studio dared acknowledge. After a near-fatal car crash in 1956 disfigured his face, Clift turned increasingly to alcohol and pills to numb the physical and emotional pain. His friendships deteriorated, romantic relationships collapsed under the weight of his addiction, and producers reluctantly insured him only at enormous cost. Elizabeth Taylor tried desperately to save him, but even she could not stop the downward spiral. By the early 1960s, his once extraordinary talent had become overshadowed by erratic behavior and dependence on substances. Montgomery Clift died in 1966 at just 45.
his final years described by friends as the longest suicide in Hollywood.
Richard Burton. It started with an incident the studios tried desperately to hide. A morning in 1963 when crew members found him slumped in his dressing room, surrounded by empty bottles, unable to stand, unable even to remember the scene he was supposed to shoot. That collapse marked the beginning of the end for Richard Burton, one of Hollywood's most commanding figures. Known for his thunderous voice, his Shakespearean brilliance, and his 6 Oscar nominations, Burton rose from Welsh poverty to global superstardom. But behind that charisma was a man imprisoned by alcohol. His marriage to Elizabeth Taylor became legendary for its passion, but privately it was fueled by violent fights, jealousy, and endless drinking. Directors built shooting schedules around his hangovers, and insurance companies hesitated to cover his films. Burton himself admitted he could not perform without a drink in his hand. By the early 1980s, years of addiction had ravaged his liver and fogged his mind. He died in 1984 at only 58, brilliant but broken. A titan destroyed not by Hollywood, but by the bottle that never left his grasp.
Richard Harris. The moment the facade shattered came in 1981, when he was hospitalized after collapsing during a promotional tour, his blood alcohol level so high that doctors were stunned he was still alive. That man was Richard Harris, the Irish titan whose booming voice and volcanic charisma electrified films like Camelot, A Man Called Horse, and later the early Harry Potter series. Harris was born to be a storyteller, a poet, a performer, but he was also born into a culture of heavy drinking that would later consume his life. His addiction began in his youth and worsened with fame. Harris became infamous for his marathon drinking sessions, sometimes lasting days, leaving directors scrambling to control productions derailed by his absence or intoxication. His marriage to Elizabeth Reese Williams collapsed under the strain, and his relationships with his children suffered as his rages and disappearances became more frequent. Though he was capable of stunning performances, they came at a cost. A body ravaged by years of alcohol abuse. By the early 2000s, Harris was exhausted. In 2002, he died at 72 from Hodgkin's disease, his weakened system unable to withstand the final battle. His brilliance never faded, but neither did the shadow of alcohol over his life.